I write a finance newsletter on Substack. When the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, they immediately stopped producing their least profitable SKUs. But if you put $100 in a company, it's a 5-bagger, it goes to $500. You have to do some math, you have to do the basics. I've been in a lot of jobs and the boss says, okay, who wants overtime this week? And nobody raises their hand. Having a family and having your family be in good health, that's the #1 predictor about whether somebody's happy.
What does failure is knowledge mean to you?
There's no ceiling above me. There's no upper limit, and that's kind of amazing.
Stephen.
Yeah.
I appreciate your patience. Thank you again for coming on to the Phase Notes podcast. I just got one question for you. Why Unemployed Value Degen?
Yeah, I write a finance newsletter on Substack, and I think, Unemployed tells everyone that I'm working on it full time. There's a lot of people that have a day job, and then their newsletter is sort of a, when I get around to it sort of thing. And I put out a lot of content. So value is I focus on mispriced stocks, things I think the price is wrong for some reason. And then Degen, they're a little on the riskier side. And, gambling is getting a lot more in the public consciousness. You got DraftKings, you got, sports betting on the Super Bowl was up 27% this year. So people are getting very in touch with risk-reward situations. And I'd like to get people more interested in getting those jollies in the stock market instead of sports betting. Because if you want to have fun thinking about the future, when you think about sports betting, it's zero sum, right? The money you lose, somebody else makes, and then the bookkeeper keeps some on top of it. When you think about the capital markets, or when you buy a piece of a business, that's a part of the capital stock. That helps finance projects. That helps, make the world a wealthier place. It's a positive sum game. So if young people want to, spend their time thinking about the future, predicting the future, trying to make money for themselves, it's just way better for everyone to gamble in the stock market.
As I was doing research, you have a background in math, and what specific? What kind of math specifically?
So in the PhD program, the kind of math, it's all statistical. We call it econometrics. It's the math behind economics, which is also the math behind weather forecasting, which is kind of funny. You should probably treat them with about the same level of confidence. But I mean, I've been in math for so long, years and years and years. What's really funny about that, though, is the more time I spend in finance, the less the math helps. You have to do some math. You have to do the basics. But for example, one of the companies that I've written about recently is so many examples of this. Let me think. So Crocs, right? The footwear Crocs. That stock is trading so cheaply right now that if their company, right now the market is pricing in that they're not going to grow anymore. If they do keep growing, and they grew 30% year over year in sales in China, and China is really known for being nationalistic, like a Buy American campaign, a Buy China campaign. The fact that they can have such enormous growth in China and South Korea and Japan, I don't think the growth story is over for them. And if the growth story is not over for Crocs, then the price is wrong. But I don't need sophisticated math to know that. All I have to know is that the consensus is that they're not going to grow anymore. And if they're wrong about that, then it's underpriced. So it doesn't take that much math for that. So after spending way too long, I had a math minor for my undergrad, and then I had all the econometrics in the PhD program. I've spent a little bit too much time in math. And it's not the most important thing. It's not nothing, but it's maybe like fifth down the line for what the most important thing is.
I forgot to read the disclaimer. So I'm gonna read the disclaimer now because that what you said is really vital, very important. I want to go back into it. So let me read the disclaimer first. The information provided in this video is for educational and informational purpose only and does not constitute financial, investment, tax, or legal advice. The views expressed are solely these of the host and guests and not advice tailored to your specific circumstances. All investing involves risk, including the loss of principal consult a licensed financial professional before making any investment decisions. So that was my first time doing a disclaimer. So I want to come back on it because you mentioned something about math. I'm actually in college for business management, and I failed my statistics class, and it was like I think it was the statistics class, and my classmate was like, "You failed? Like, how did you fail?" I'm like, "It happens. It's not the end of the world."
Yeah.
However, learning how to look at the numbers and understanding the numbers is like, man, sometimes I probably won't ever use this. However, when I got into business, I start hearing the variations language, the standard deviations. I'm like, wait, hold on. Statistics is important in business?
Yeah, yeah.
That blew my mind. And so since you have a background in math and now you're in the financial space, you're still dealing with numbers. How are you able to transition to the entrepreneurship mindset instead of a teacher mindset?
So that's a very different thing, because numbers, math, sometimes it's more about the relationships. And if you understand those relationships and how things work, it's very helpful. But there is a difference between the teaching mindset and the business mindset. And maybe I'll handle those things separately. So for example, one of the relationships, remember learning in science class how a glass of water cools down as it evaporates, right? Because the really hot pieces, the high energy particles, they're flying out of there, and all the particles that left, they're lower in the average. You can think of the temperature of the glass of water like a bell curve. You chop off one end of the bell curve and the average moves. There's a company I wrote about recently, it's a brand conglomerate, it's called Newell Brands. When the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, they immediately stopped producing their least profitable SKUs, right? They axed whole brands. I think they might have fired, because they had been buying brands over time, and they looked through the brands, and they had a lot of things that were cannibalistic, a lot of things that were competing with each other. And so they ended entire brands. They didn't even try to sell them. They just ended them completely. But when you chop off the least profitable part of the business, then that average gets to shift. So now their profit margins are way up. So they axed, I forget what the percentage, but it's I think it was 60% of their brands. They just chopped them right off. But now their profit margins are much better. And now it's just a question of when will we see them return to growth again. So those relationships, like knowing how a glass of water cools as it evaporates, that is just a part of math, and those relationships are helpful. Now, the difference between the academic world and the business world, that's huge. Because, and there's an expression about this, that if you hear hoofbeats, you don't immediately think unicorn, right? If you hear hoofbeats, you think, oh, there's probably a horse coming. Academics are always looking at these edge cases. Where do all these rules break down? And all the rules break, at the extremes, at these edge cases, at the unicorns. And business is about, the everyday, normal, basic stuff. So business is not really thinking about unicorns nearly as much. So they're looking in different places. They're turning over different rocks. They're just thinking different ways. So there is a disconnect between academia and business, and it's huge. And I think in the business world, academic is kind of an insult, And in the academic world, I don't think they think about business at all. But they're both important, but they're totally different cultures, totally different mindsets. And it was a pretty big shift, but it's people are adaptable. People can adjust.
And I definitely agree. And even in your company name's Unemployed Value Degen, and the unemployed part, it was something that caught my attention. Like, well, how are you unemployed doing the business that you would like to do? And it's like, well, there's a story behind everything. So how are you unemployed doing the business that you're doing around like the financial space?
Yeah, I have had some of my subscribers tell me I should change the name to Self-Employed Value Degen now, but because the nice thing about it is I don't have a boss, right? I can't be fired. I've got 6,000 subscribers, and I try not to make them all too angry. Sometimes you have to talk about politics when it affects the market, and a lot of my subscribers are from New York and California, where Silicon Valley and where the stock market is. So I try and tread very lightly on anything that would make people angry enough to want to unsubscribe, and that's usually politics. But sometimes I have to do devil's advocate and take these Trump policy changes as, take them at face value and see what the consequences are going to be. So for example, Tariff Liberation Day. If we're really in some sort of a Cold War with China, which, in Florida, our entire citrus industry has been destroyed because of a virus that came from China. And you read news articles every month, there's a Chinese researcher in the US who's smuggling some sort of toxin, some sort of fungus that could destroy a crop in the US. I mean, this is part of a total war campaign, and it's destroyed the citrus industry in Florida. So if we're really in a Cold War with China, it's perfectly reasonable for the US to go to their allies and say everybody has to throw some money in the hat. And that means, 10% tariffs. But the press treats it like, the United States has betrayed everyone, that, the framing in the news media is terrible. But the reality is, like, look, this is a Cold War, this is a race, and the United States does not want to do it alone. So everybody throw some money in the hat. And for 60 years, it's been the other way. For 60 years, Europe has had 10% tariffs on us, and we haven't had it on them. As we were rebuilding Europe after World War II. We'll say, okay, the war is over, you guys are rebuilt. Now the money flows the other way. Now you got to throw some money in the hat to win the new Cold War. And that's a reasonable position. That's not Trump being some crazy lunatic. But, trying to take that side of the argument, that could cost you some subscribers.
I definitely agree. Just to confirm, it's not a politics. It's not a politic podcast. However, you just said something about how math and understanding financials is not that it shouldn't be that complicated. But now you have to do different type of research. When I got into business and start understanding what the podcast business I was in, it was like around like editing and publishing and then the skill behind it. But I'm like, well, what business am I actually in? What category am I in? And then when it hit me, it was like podcast production. You're in the podcast production business. Now I have to do research around the podcast production instead of editing, scheduling, things of that nature. It's like, well, your research changed because yes, the financial has a lot of numbers in it. However, the research is different. You just explained the importance of research, so you're helping people understand the market based off your research.
Yeah. And I think that's really what I do. And I have to compete against ChatGPT though, because I'm taking a lot of information and summarizing it, and that's what AI is doing. But and I also use AI myself. I use some of those large language models. But the reason why there's opportunity in the marketplace is because people disagree, and thus there's a fundamental disagreement there. So, for example, some people think that Crocs is done growing, and I think that Crocs still has growth in front of it. In areas where people disagree, an AI summary probably is not going to be so helpful. You can ask it to give you a bull case and a bear case, but there's still room for a human being there, at least for a couple more years. We'll see what happens if AI gets us all out of the job. But I actually have, I think we will reach some sort of a limit to what AI is able to do and AI is able to figure out. I mean, it's going to do some very impressive things, but I think we're going to find out that there are limitations to that. The technologists out there think that artificial intelligence is going to, just really outpace and overtake human minds. And in a lot of ways it does, right? For recalling facts, has access to all the facts in the universe. But when there's disagreement, when there's judgment calls, I don't know if AI is ever really going to be able to do that sort of judgment. And part of the reason for that is, and this is way, way, way down in the weeds of the philosophy of science, we don't really know how judgment works. Like if you've got two kinds of logic going on in your brain. You've got inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning, right? So inductive reasoning, you have this, the idea of black swans. In Europe, all swans are white, and all the biology books say that swans are white. Explorers get to Australia and swans are black there. So suddenly everything you thought you knew, it gets reversed by a counterexample. You take these specifics, you try to make a rule. Deductive reasoning is, if you have a rule and if you're applying it, excuse me, I have to sneeze. If you have a rule and you're applying it, if the rule, if your logic is sound and your premises are true, the conclusions are necessarily true, right? And that's what things like coding, formal logic gates, and/or statements, if-then statements. That's deductive reasoning. We don't know how our brain handles it when those two things disagree, right? If deductive reasoning is telling you one thing and inductive reasoning is telling you a different thing, we don't really know how our brain clears that. So I think when it comes down to judgment calls, I don't know if AI will never be able to solve it, or if they'll solve it in 10 years or 5 years or 2 years. But I'm a little bit more, I'm optimistic at all the business cases people are going to find for AI. But it's almost like, when it comes to CPUs for processors, we had this Moore's law. It was getting faster, it was getting faster, it was getting faster. And then finally they got it to such a size that, the electrons, as they were moving through the processor, it would actually jump positions. And that was the smallest you could get it. Say, okay, well, we can't make processors any smaller now. So if we're going to improve, we have to use a totally different technology. They got to go, 3D, or they got to use quantum computing. So that technology hit its limit, and we got to look in other places. So, maybe it takes 5 or 10 years, but AI is going to hit a limit, and we're going to have to look other places. But it's, there's going to be a limit to it someday.
I appreciate you bringing back Crocs up, because I wanted to ask you, because when you explained it, he was like something about Crocs. A lot of people undervalue different businesses that you look into, and it made me think about how history repeats itself. Like back in the day, Crocs wasn't known. Then, like when you fast forward to history, Crocs come out with the little design on there, with the little logos and things of that nature. I was like, huh. What do you think about history repeat itself?
Well, in a situation like Crocs, what's funny is I think a lot of it has to do with the people that work in finance, right? The people that work in finance, and they pitch this company to their portfolio manager. You take a company like Peloton, right? Peloton, it was marketed heavily to people that live in Manhattan and people that work in finance. So the people in the stock market were users. But the people that work in the stock market, they can't go to work wearing Crocs, right? It's outside of what they're going to use, and they kind of look down on it. But when they get home from work, their wife and kids are wearing Crocs. So it's kind of funny. It's really hated from a fashion perspective by people that work in finance, and I think that's part of what's led to the mispricing. That because people that work in finance don't like it as a product, that's shown up in the stock price. And as long as they're generating cash and they're buying back stock, that's fantastic. It's cheap. It makes the share buybacks more effective. And at some point, if I'm right and they return to growth and they're buying back stock, then the stock price will catch up. Right? At some point, you give it enough years of showing growth, of having profits and buying back stock. At some point, people that work in finance just have to say, okay, well, I guess this product is around for a while. It's not just a fad. It's not just a temporary thing.
And you said earlier that you said something about disagreement.
Disagreement makes a market, right?
Disagreement makes a market.
The only reason there's opportunities, the only reason why the price is wrong is because people disagree. I mean, some people call it uncertainty. Some people like to focus on the disagreement side of things, but it's really about disagreement. Right now, some people think, Elon Musk is about to have an IPO for SpaceX, and Elon Musk is talking about he wants to deploy data centers in space. And people that love Elon Musk say, hey, this is a great idea. He's going to do it. Like, look, he made electric vehicles. He made a new car company. People used to say, and even Warren Buffett used to use that as an example. Like the car companies would have this defensive moat because who's going to make a new car company these days, right? You'd have to start from scratch and create so much. And he did it. So people that support Elon Musk wouldn't want to bet against him. But there's a lot of people online right now say, like, this is a pipe dream. He's never going to have, 100 gigawatts a year deployed of data centers in space. And there's a big disagreement there. But you read the news, and I think right now 6 U.S. states have bans on new data center construction. So if you can't build data centers on land, where are you going to build them? Google has experimented with underwater data centers because you get the free cooling of the ocean. But salt corrodes everything. So maybe the data centers are going to be floating on the water. But Elon Musk thinks he can do it in outer space, which, Elon Musk makes a lot of promises. And, he said full self-driving would be next year for about 5 years. But full self-driving is pretty much here. It finally arrived. It took a little longer, but now everybody's happy with their Teslas being driven by computer. So when there's so much love and hate for someone, there's big disagreement there. And SpaceX and Tesla are a good example of disagreement in the market.
Okay, so you say the disagreement causes the market to grow, or the market to...
That's what makes the opportunity. That's what makes
opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're right about it, Right. If you think that
I was
Elon
just about to
Musk
ask
will,
that.
if you think Elon Musk will never make data centers in space, and
Mhm.
you're right, you can make money on that. If you think that Elon Musk will make data centers in space, and you're right, you can make money on that. So that's what makes the opportunity is the disagreement.
So either way, you can make money on it, depending upon you do your research
Yeah.
upon the side you want to lean upon.
Yep, that's right. If you can dig into things and think, hey, I see a different future than people. And this happened to me with, so when I first started getting into investing, I just took the narrative that a lot of people had at the time, which was that electric vehicles are going to take over everything. And I was, digging into one company at a time, and I'm looking into mining companies. And one of the most famous mine developers in the world said, look, well, there's not going to be electric vehicles. And the reason is I mine nickel, and I can't mine that much nickel. If you gave me an unlimited amount of money, I couldn't get you that much nickel in 5 years. It just can't be done, right? We haven't found the deposits. We haven't proven the deposits. All this stuff takes time. So all these, 2035 electric vehicle targets, the people that actually provide the nickel for the batteries were saying that cannot happen, right? So I took that and I invested in an offshore drilling company. And the idea was, look, if we need more oil, right, this sector is so beaten down, it's so cheap, it's priced for obsolescence. It's priced as if it's going away. And the stock price of that oil drilling company went from $2 up to $8. And then the oil price has been low. It fell back down to $2 again, and now it's back up to about $5.50. So it's these narratives come and go about how much oil we're going to need. But there was really a moment when it seems like everybody thought we'd be only on electric vehicles. And the manufacturers and the miners were saying there's not enough metal for that. There is just not enough metal. So there are chances where you can do the work, find where people disagree, take a side, and you can be right on it. And that's fantastic.
And that's interesting because you talk about the journey of yourself and how you go from being employed, unemployed to self-employed. So now I want to ask you, like, what was your biggest failure when you first started when you first got into entrepreneurship?
I mean, the whole journey of creating my Substack and writing, I don't think there's any noticeable failures within that. I mean, the failure was when I went from being a university professor to filling out a bunch of job applications and trying to find a job, while at the same time, artificial intelligence is destroying the whole white-collar landscape. So that was a rough moment. It drives you crazy writing resumes and writing cover letters and filling them out and submitting them. And also, I'm from a world where people would post the job opening and they get 6 resumes. Now they post the job opening, they get thousands online. It's so easy to apply to everything. And then if you don't know what kind of software their HR department uses to skim resumes for buzzwords, you don't get to the top of the stack. It's a totally different world. I mean, I'm so old. When I applied for jobs, it was in person with a pen and a piece of paper, and you'd meet somebody and they would shake your hand. And I did fantastic in that world. I don't know, people always like me when I meet them. So through that process of filling out, application after application after application.
I mean, estimate.
How many I filled out?
Yes.
I don't know. It was I probably got burnt out after about 150 maybe. And I know some people do thousands, but that was when, just on a lark, just for fun, I said I have to write something other than cover letters and resumes. So I wrote some articles on Substack, and my 3rd article got retweeted and 15,000 people saw it. And I thought, oh wow, this has potential. This is something. So and my moment of failure was hitting the job market, and it wasn't even that I was unemployable. I could find a job with a national search, but one of the problems is when you have 2 people who are married and they both have advanced degrees, you get limited geographically pretty fast, right? My wife has a job here in Tampa, and I search for who wants somebody with a master's in economics and was in the PhD program in finance and happens to be hiring in June and things like that, and you start running out of options pretty quick, right? So it's kind of funny that the higher you go in formal education, the more limited the job search is. So I mean, I know I could have found a job if I did a national search, but my wife has her career here as well, so you get pretty limited.
What is it saying? Overqualified.
Yeah, yeah,
Is that the
maybe
right saying?
over credentialed, maybe.
Ah, man. And so we you say over credential, which so my mama has 9 degrees, and now that I'm in college to get my degree and things of that nature, I see the difference between being educated and not being educated. Not the fact that it's something wrong with being educated.
Yeah.
It's like it's kind of like what is it called? I don't know the right terminology, but it's like you get educated and now it's like it's used against you rather than for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, part of it is because the quality of education has fallen so much. I mean, I went to college in 1999. I took calculus 3 and differential equations before it got watered down. And I know what math I used to do, and I see what math the undergraduates are complaining about, and it's a totally different night and day. I mean, the quality has fallen so much in certain disciplines. And another thing is just, when you're trying to serve 2 masters, the mission statement can get confused and it can get lost, right? We saw this in the global financial crisis in 2008. Is a house something that you live in, or is a house an investment? And if people start getting confused about those 2 things, it's both, but when you start getting a little confused, you get problems. Higher education started out as, this is a place for children of wealthy families to become Plato's philosopher king, right? That's how education started. But now it's also trying to fit in, this is a place where you get vocational training to have a career path. And now you got government subsidized loans for both. So you have a lot of confusion about, am I supposed to be, a wealthy kid whose future is taken care of because I inherit the family business anyway, and I'm going to spend 4 years drinking and studying philosophy and becoming Plato's philosopher king? Or do I need to come here, learn a specific skill set so I can hit the job market and find a job? And you give them, 3% subsidized student loans on top of it, and then you have people from poor backgrounds that study to become a philosopher king and can't find a job, and it's very tragic. So when you've got this confusion of purpose and you lost your mission statement, you can have a lot of problems there. And I think higher education sort of lost its mission statement.
So I'm going to go off script, the format that you receive, the same format when I'm going off script. So what I do when I typically say I'm going off script, I ask you 3 tips. Like if I was somebody new getting into finances and like I have no idea, I have no experience, but I come to Steven and I ask you, what are 3 tips to get into finance, to learn more about investing and prepare for my future? What are 3 tips that you can share with me?
So not talking about a young person trying to find a job in finance, but somebody for their personal finances just getting started, right? So
For your business.
Yeah, for your business. So what I look at is, when I taught finance, I would take the students and I would have them, write out in a spreadsheet sort of a retirement plan. I'd talk to them about, you look at your whole life cycle, right? You're working from the time you're maybe 25 to 65. You got these 40 years of work. That has to pay for, right, your own kids. You got to raise your own kids, and you have to be able to set aside enough money to get you from 65 to 85, and then if medicine gets a little stronger, to get you to 95 maybe. So you're going to work for 40 years, but you also have to fund yourself for 20 or 30. So if you have to get your purchasing power from the time you're working to the time you're not working, how much do you think you have to set aside out of every paycheck? I mean, you're only working for 40 years, and you're going to not be working 20 or 30 years. How much do you have to set aside out of every paycheck? And when you frame it like that, people think, hey, maybe setting aside $500 a month, something like, a mid-sized car payment, maybe that's about reasonable. Maybe that's not too much. So, I mean, the first thing is you got to save. You got to put some money away for the rainy day. You can't live hand to mouth like a hunter-gatherer. You can't spend everything you make because you've got decades that you have to fund yourself when you're not working. Or do you want to work forever? You want to be like a 75-year-old Walmart greeter? And I don't think that's plan A for most people. So you have to save. And saving is not fun, right? That money is burning a hole in your pocket. You want to spend it. So what I tell young people to do from a psychological perspective, and this might not be the best compounder, it might not be tax efficient, But if you're young, I want you to focus on dividend-paying stocks. And even though I try and teach them about how powerful compound interest is, what I want young people to do is to buy dividend-paying stocks, have those dividends get swept into their checking account where they're going to spend it on their debit card. And then every time that gets swept in, make sure they have an alert set up on their phone. I want their pocket to ding and to buzz when it says, hey, you got a $23 dividend from the stock you own. I want their pocket to ding and buzz about it, and I want them to spend it. Because you need that psychological reinforcement that there's cheese at the end of the maze, right? Most people go to work, they have a 401k program, they withhold the most that they can get matching on for employer matching, and they don't think about it for 40 years. And they're not consciously a part of the system, right? They're not consciously a part of capitalism. In their mind, they're an employee, and they hope that their employer matching 401k contribution will take care of them for 30 years, but they've never calculated it, they've never looked at it, it's not in their mind, they're not present for it, right? They're just on autopilot. If you start putting money in an account, buying dividend-paying stocks, having those dividends swept into your checking account, having it ding and buzz in your pocket, you got 23 bucks, you got 35 bucks, an amazing thing happens in your mind, right? Suddenly, you're not rowing the boat by yourself. Suddenly, your ownership of the capital stock, it's working along with you. And first, you get your first dividend payment and it's like, okay, 20 bucks, this can maybe cover the water bill, maybe not. It takes a while. Maybe it covers going out to lunch. You say, hey, I got my dividend check. I got this dividend swept in my account. That pays for lunch. That pays for a drink at a bar. But that starts reinforcing those positive neurotransmitters in your brain, and you start realizing, well, there's cheese at the end of the maze, and you start getting more excited about putting money in your stock account. You start getting more excited about buying dividend stocks, right? And then suddenly you get a dividend payment one day, and it's enough to cover your electric bill, and you're like, wow, I'm not rowing the boat all by myself. And you do it for a few years longer, you get a dividend payment might be big enough to cover your car note, right? And then it really feels like you're not rowing the boat all by yourself. And that process takes a few years. And at some point, as you get more involved, as it becomes more fun for you, as you get excited about it, you start learning that dividend companies, there might be better companies out there, right? There might be companies that are growing faster. There might be companies that are better suited for you. Oh, and you get all these tax benefits if you put it in a Roth IRA, things like that. But I think the first step is getting those positive neurotransmitters in your brain, getting that serotonin and dopamine, having your pocket buzz and ding, and making sure that you're having fun. You're not rowing the boat by yourself. You're not just putting money behind a tax penalty paywall for your 401k because you're supposed to, because your parents told you to do it. It's becoming an active part of the capital markets, becoming an active part in your own future. Being the master of your own destiny, taking a conscious, active role in it. And having your pocket ding and buzz every time a stock pays you a $20 dividend is a really good way to do that.
That is a great point. So just to recap, save, invest in dividend stocks, and what was the last one?
Make sure those dividends are swept into your checking account, into your debit card, and make sure your pocket dings and buzzes. Make sure you have some sort of alert turned on your phone. That's going to make all the difference, because you start getting these messages, and the first one will feel kind of silly. By the time you've gotten 10 of them, it's like an old friend, right? It's like you come home from work and your golden retriever is happy to see you. It starts reinforcing that pathway in your brain, and you start having more fun about it. And say, hey, what else can I do that's going to pay me a dividend this month? What I've been in a lot of jobs, and the boss says, okay, who wants overtime this week? And nobody raises their hand, because they don't really care. At work, you're like, well, work sucks. My boss is a jerk. I don't want to be here. But when an extra couple $100, you can do something with it, right? You can put another $200 deployed into the capital stock to row in the boat along with you. Suddenly your hand goes up, right? When your boss asks, who wants to be the team lead for this project? And because, it's kind of a hassle, I don't want to do it. Maybe your hand starts going up because you say, hey, look, if I get that promotion earlier, I can start putting more money into my stock brokerage account. I can start getting more people in this boat rowing alongside with me, and I'm not alone on this thing. So it's really important, I think, psychologically, to start making sure you get to feel those dividends, to get paid, to spend the money, to enjoy the money, so you're not rowing the boat all by yourself. And if you start that young, the world's yours. because if most people that just do the 401k matching, it goes behind a black box and they never see it or look at it or think about it ever again. And they hope that the system is organized in such a way as they're going to be taken care of. But they've never put in the effort to make sure of that. When I was a financial advisor at Merrill Lynch, the number of people who hit retirement age, right? They turn 65, they retire from their work, they get an envelope from their 401k company, and it's like, surprise, here's where you're at. But you haven't thought about this 20 years ago? You didn't think about this 30 years ago? No, this is the first they're thinking about it. They just rely on the system to take care of them. And that's terrifying because, it's a high trust society and there are good rules in place. We put it in a target date mutual fund, you'll do okay. But that is a lot of trust to have, your last 20 or 30 years on this earth and to have never thought about how you're going to feed yourself or clothe yourself. And as the baby boomers are such a large generation, you are getting this situation in the senior care facilities that the quality between the highest and the lowest is such a huge gap in quality. I've got an aunt, she had a stroke recently, and she's not of means. She can't pay for the $7,000 a month nice facility. So she's in a facility where, when it's a holiday, a lot of those nurses call in sick. And if they're short-staffed, you're in this, elder care facility, you ring the buzzer for help and nobody comes, right? For hours and hours at a time because it's Saturday and they called in sick, or they're short-staffed, or it's a holiday. It's St. Patrick's Day and 2 or 3 of them called in sick at the same day, right? And if if you can't get out of bed, if you have mobility issues, if you're really relying on that elder care facility, having an extra $7,000 a month to pay for the nice one buys a lot of dignity, right? So people that have never thought about it their whole lives, I think they're in for a rude surprise when they see these facilities and how expensive they are.
Wow, yeah, I definitely agree because I attended this course. It was called Mom House, and they explain how like when a person get older, they can't necessarily take out the house no more, so now they have to sell the house, go into the facility. And then when they explain everything, the facility itself is really expensive. So if you don't have nothing to sell, that option is not even on the table. So I do want to talk about, thank you for sharing that as well. I do want to talk about Unemployed Value Degen. Like, what's the business behind that? Like, who are you serving? What's your customers? And how do you go about the business side of it?
Yeah, so I'm writing about small companies that I think are mispriced. I think are going to do really well. But it's some of them, sometimes I'm wrong. Some of them do go bankrupt. But when you find a company that when I'm right, you make 500%. But when I'm wrong, right, if a company goes to zero, you put $100 in a company and it goes bankrupt, that $100 is gone. It's gone to zero. But if you put $100 in a company, it's a 5-bagger, it goes to $500. So if you're right half the time you turn $100 into 250, or you turn, half the time you turn $200 into $500. That's not so bad. That's a pretty good return. So the degen part of it is some of these companies do go bankrupt. Some of them, they're mispriced because they have a pretty high debt burden. And I'm saying, look, I think interest rates are falling. I think they're going to be able to refinance. I think they're fine. But sometimes I'm wrong about that. My target audience is people who are actively looking for this stuff. People who, used to be the sport of gentlemen was horses and falcons, right? And, I think the Kennedys, they still keep falcons, right? I mean, and I think in some of the Saudi princes too, right? Falconry is still sort of this sport of princes. I think much more than that now. It's predicting the stock market, finding these mispriced companies, being an active participant in it. And it was really popular in the 1990s. You go back to engineering firms in the 1990s, everybody would be standing around the water cooler in the office building talking about which tech stock they're buying. And after the dot-com crash, that whole culture disappeared. But with the coronavirus lockdowns and the Robinhood zero commission trading, right, the payment for order flow, it's become a thing again. It's suddenly become popular again for young people to talk about which stocks they're buying in the stock market. Are they buying Tesla? Are they buying Under Armour? Are they buying Lululemon? And I think that culture is really healthy. It's definitely a lot better than betting on the Super Bowl. So my audience tends to be people that were working in the 90s, that were in that culture where this is sort of this gentleman's sport, right? We're picking which companies are going to be successful. And the young people from COVID, that, they don't have as much confidence in the system. They don't think getting 8% compounded for 40 years is going to take care of them. They think, and they're hearing this in the news. They say, oh, you've got to make money in the next 5 years before artificial intelligence takes your job. So they want that stock that can be a 5-bagger or a 10-bagger or a 20-bagger. So my audience right now is 60-year-olds and 20-year-olds. And it's kind of hollow in the middle, right? There's a lot of 40-year-olds that aren't thinking about their future, and that's a little bit sad. But that's my market right now, is the 60-year-olds and the 20-year-olds.
Okay, random question. Is my phone right there? Is it a phone just that's leaning right here?
A phone?
Yeah, a phone.
Yeah, it's
Do
there.
you mind grabbing that for me?
Yeah, I can grab that for you.
Thank you. So, and I appreciate you sharing that, because one thing that I've learned while being in business, even though although we in the Spartan Incubator program here at the Love Center, is that you have to understand the business side of the creative. The creative, I can do. Like, I can do podcast, I can have the conversation, I can do all these different things. But it's like, well, what's the business side behind it? Well, I'm like, there's a business? What do you mean there's a business? Like, learning how to do the business, how to market, how to sell, how to promote, how to follow up, how to do all these different things that business consists of. I recognize that a lot of people understand that, yes, you can be creative, you can do the creativity behind it. However, the creativity is very limited if you don't understand the business side of it. So that's why I went to ask you that question. So real quick, we got one last segment, and it's called Best for Last. It's when I ask you 4 questions and you answer within 30 seconds.
Okay.
You ready?
Rapid fire?
Rapid fire, yes, sir. So question number 1, what are you grateful for?
Oh, everything. I'm most grateful that when I was in grad school, talk about being over-credentialed and closing off the job market, but I met a wonderful girl there, and I convinced her to marry me. And now we have 2 beautiful kids, 6.5 and 3.5. So that's the thing I'm most grateful for. Because the dating world, the dating scene in the U.S., just the culture people are coming from, it is a mess. And I got very lucky, and I know that I was lucky. That's the number one thing. And my wife, she's an economist. She studies in the happiness literature, and you look at people at the end of their life, and if they're happy or not happy, and what it is about their lives that make them happy. Having a family and having your family be in good health, that's the number one predictor about whether somebody's happy. If you have a family and your family is healthy, everything else, how much money you make, all that stuff, it doesn't really matter anywhere near as much as if you've got family and your family are healthy.
That's powerful. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Question number 2, do you have any regrets?
Not really. I took a very different path, but I wouldn't be me if I had taken a different path. You know what I mean? So there's not much room for regrets, because for example, if I hadn't been in a car accident and messed up my knee, I wouldn't have gone back to college. I'm not able to stand for a shift anymore, but I had a lot more to offer the world than working a blue collar job. So I'm grateful for that car accident, but when some days starting to get a little arthritic, it kind of bothers me. But you know what? My life is a lot better having gone back to college and kind of failing upward.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Dang, that was powerful. I was about to pick back on it, but I'll do it after this. What was your biggest takeaway while being the founder of Unemployed Value Degen?
My biggest takeaway, I lived in a town in Maine called Pittsfield. I think the population's still something like 200 people. And I was on Beans Corner Road in Pittsfield, Maine. And the world seemed so small. I had to ask my parents' permission if I could call my cousins in the next county, because long distance plans, it was different county to county and time of day. And now I have subscribers paying to read what I write in Kazakhstan, on the other side of the world. And it's just amazing how small the world has gotten in my lifetime. And my grandmother passed away not too long ago at the age of 99. I would always ask her stories about what the world was like, horse manure on the road and taking trains and things like that. And in my lifetime, going from Beans Corner Road in Pittsfield, Maine, to having somebody paying to read my opinion from Kazakhstan is it's just so humbling, so powerful. It is thousands of people. I think Last month, I had over 100,000 people read my articles. And that's coming from a town with like 200 people in it. It's kind of, it's just so unbelievably humbling. And most people can't even imagine what 100,000 people is. You think of the last time you were in a football stadium that held 40,000 people and think like, well, 2.5 of those. That is just, it's people have a very hard time visualizing numbers bigger than that. And it's just massive.
I'm sending my condolences to you and your family as well.
Well, she lived to be 99. She had a good life.
Oh yeah, okay. And then last question: what does failure is knowledge mean to you?
Yeah, H.L. Mencken had this really good quote. He said he was sold up the river, that instead of being sold down the river, he was sold up the river. Because every time somebody fired him, he ended up somewhere better. And I think that's what happened to me. I was very surprised. The university I was at, I was told it's like a family. No one's ever been fired here. There was one lady, had a mental breakdown. She didn't submit final grades. That's what it took to get fired. And then they got a new president, and the culture changed. And a couple people didn't have their contracts renewed, and it was kind of a shock, kind of a surprise. And the university is still growing. Some universities are shrinking. It really was just a pure culture shift. I guess we're not family anymore. But I think it really was like the H.L. Mencken quote that I was sold up the river, because now I have a business that can grow. Now there's billions of people in the world, and there's hundreds of millions of millionaires, and the American stock market. I do write about other countries too, but the American stock market is where all the action is, and there's people that want to be part of that sport of trying to see the future, trying to be right, trying to predict what's going to happen. That means I could have, right now I've got 6,600 subscribers. The most popular Substacks have tens of thousands of subscribers. So I know I can do better. I can grow the business. There's no ceiling above me, right? It's, there's no upper limit, and that's kind of amazing. And that's very different from being somebody's employee and being in a job and saying, well, if I do really good, I'll get a 3% raise. If I do badly, I'll get a 1% raise. It's a totally different mindset.
I definitely agree, because now the work is dependent upon you. Stephen, man, this has been incredible. How can people find you? How can they learn more about Unemployed Value Degen? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, I have the Unemployed Value Degen Substack, and I'm also active on Twitter, same name, Unemployed Value Degen. I'm turning over rocks every day. I'm trying to find buried treasure, trying to find companies people disagree about, trying to be able to see the future, a little better than other people. The term speculator, it comes from the Latin word for watchtower. The idea is if you climb that tower, you can see farther than everybody else. And that's what research is to me. I climb the watchtower. I try to be able to see just a little bit farther. I don't have a background in technology, but you're able to figure things out. Like, electric vehicles, they can't take over the whole market. There's not enough nickel to do it. And that allowed me to make some investments that, became multi-baggers. And that's where I think the fun is. And there's also fun in making money. So it's nice to be able to add value. That I've had people send me messages and say, look, my subscription paid for itself 1,000 times. Somebody pays me $100 and they make $10,000 off of my idea, and that's fantastic. It's a pretty durable product that the value added can, if they're making money off me, they can easily pay the subscription.
I definitely agree, man. Stephen, this has been great. Before we end, I'd like to end with a quote from you. Now, there's a lot of quotes from a lot of people that we can quote, but specifically from you. So I go first. The quote I'm going to go with is, learn the importance of failure, because you never know what this failure is going to lead to.
That's fantastic.
I appreciate it.
And now you want me to come up with a quote.
Of yourself.
Quoting myself, have it be profound on the spot. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure. Yeah. Well, a lot of people in the stock market think that it's competitive, that the other side knows something you don't, that they have an edge and you don't have an edge. And what they're missing is, it's a positive sum game, right? Everybody can make money at the same time. If somebody's selling you a stock, they can have a bunch of different reasons for it. It doesn't mean that you're the patsy at the poker table. right? You're buying a business. It might be a good business. They might be selling it because they're retired. They need the money to pay their mortgage, right? They need the money to pay their bills. They might not be selling it because they think it's a bad business. So there's a lot of people out there that think, you're the sucker at the poker table. And capital markets are positive sum. It doesn't have to be like that. You don't know why they're selling that stock. So it's, if you're going to quote me, I'd say, investing is a positive sum game. Everybody can win.
Oh, on that note, that was good. That was good, man. I appreciate it. I'm gonna stop recording. Stephen, again, thank you for coming on to the Failure Knowledge Podcast. What was your biggest takeaway while being on the podcast?
Oh, I mean, my biggest takeaway, it's just how small the world has gotten. That you can put out a podcast and it can be seen by, you look at the metrics, the demographics, you find out somebody watched your podcast in Singapore, somebody watched it in Malaysia, somebody watched it in Kazakhstan. It's just amazing how small the world is getting.
I definitely agree. And last question for someone that's hesitant to come on to the Failure Knowledge Podcast, what's one piece of advice that you can give them?
Oh, it's that old joke. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? You practice. You just got to keep making one step at a time, one podcast after another. Just, step by step, one at a time. That's all it takes.